The end of the Major League Baseball season is approaching quickly, which means it's almost time for playoffs. And when you hear the word playoffs, you automatically think of the World Series. For those of you who have watched videos on my channel, you know I love to include every single team in my videos. So I thought a great way to do that, along with tying it into the World Series, would be to talk about the last time every team won a World Series in Major League Baseball. This video is going to be a trip to the past, a little bit of a nostalgic video, and there definitely was a lot of research and time put into this, so if you guys do enjoy it, make sure to leave a like on it. That's the best way to show you want to see more of this kind of content. If you love baseball, this is the place to be. Make sure to hit the sub button, join the team so you don't miss out on any videos. If you want to continue to talk about baseball, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at GiraffeNeckMarc, links in the description. And of course, if you want to buy any tickets to any sports games, make sure to head on over to SeatGeek and use the code Giraffe to save yourself $20 off your first purchase. So to start off a video talking about past World Series, I figured the perfect team to start off with would be the New York Yankees, because who lives in the past more than Yankee fans? They love to tell you about 27 rings, but it has actually been almost 10 years since the Yankees last won one. So yes, if the Yankees don't win this year, they will have gone a full decade without winning a World Series. This 2009 Yankees team was pretty dominant. They finished with a record of 103-59, which got them first place in the American League East, and they didn't have any trouble in the playoffs, including the World Series where they beat the Phillies 4-2. Offensively, they were off the charts. Jorge Posada, Mark Teixeira, Robinson Cano, Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, Johnny Damon, Hideki Matsui, Nick Swisher. All of these guys had phenomenal years. They had 7 players hit over 20 homers and 8 players with an OPS above 800. On the pitching side, they were led by CC Sabathia, who had a great season. AJ Burnett, Andy Pettitte, and Jabbar Chamberlain also held down the starting rotation. And then in the bullpen, you had Mariano Rivera, who is the greatest closer of all time, along with Phil Hughes, who was great out of the bullpen, and David Robertson just getting his start. This Yankees team was filthy. Another team with great tradition is the St. Louis Cardinals, and the last time they won a World Series was in 2011. Now, unlike the Yankees championship in 2009, the Cardinals weren't as dominant in 2011. They finished with a 90-72 record, which actually got them second place in the National League Central, so they made it in as a wild card team. And in the World Series, they had to go to Game 7 against the Texas Rangers, but they eventually won it. After losing Game 5, the Cardinals went down 3-2 in the series and were down to their final strike until David Freese stepped up and hit a game-tying triple in the 9th inning, followed by a home run in the 11th to win it all. This was the World Series of David Freese. While he stole the headlines in the World Series, they definitely had some other solid players on this team. Guys like Albert Pujols, who's going to go down as one of the best players of all time. Yadier Molina, who's considered one of the best defensive catchers of all time. You had Lance Berkman, Matt Holliday, and they had a lot of production from Alan Craig off the bench. On the pitching side, they were led by Chris Carpenter, but they had a strong rotation that included Jaime Garcia, Kyle Loesch, Jake Westbrook, and Edwin Jackson. Fernando Salas was their closer, who obviously had the best year of his career because you haven't heard much about him since, and Jason Mott, both with ERAs under 2.3 and whips under 1. For the Baltimore Orioles, it's been a little bit longer. The last time they won a World Series was 1983, and in that season they finished 98-64, first in the American League East, and won the World Series fairly easy over the Philadelphia Phillies 4-1. They were led by the MVP of that season, Cal Ripken, who finished with 27 homers, 47 doubles, and 102 RBIs with an 888 OPS, and they also had Eddie Murray at first base, who had a great season as well with an OPS at 930. And even pitching-wise, kind of lacked some names. Scott McGregor, Storm Davis, Mike Boddicker, Dennis Martinez, Mike Flanagan, and Jim Palmer led that rotation. And then on the bullpen side, their closer, Tippy Martinez, and other strong arms like Sammy Stewart and Dan Morigiello. Keeping it in the 80s, we're talking about the Los Angeles Dodgers, who haven't won a World Series in 31 years, which dates them back to 1988. This Dodgers team was pretty solid, 94-67, which got them a first place finish in the National League West. They of course beat the Mets in the NLCS to get to the World Series, where they beat the Oakland A's pretty easily 4-1. This World Series is probably most familiar to you due to Kirk Gibson hitting his famous walk-off home run where he was injured in Game 1 of the World Series, and obviously the rest is history. Now, as for the players on this team, again, not crazy good offensively. You had Kirk Gibson, who won the MVP that year with 25 homers, 28 doubles, and 76 RBIs, and 860 OPS. Mike Marshall hit 20 homers and drove in 80 that year, but Gibson was the only player with an OPS above 800 because the pitching side was really where they dominated. Orel Hershiser, Tim Leary, Tim Belcher, all starting pitchers with ERAs below 3. They also had Fernando Valenzuela and Don Sutton in that rotation. In the bullpen, Jay Howell was their main guy as a closer, along with Alejandro Pena and Brian Holton holding it down, all with ERAs hovering right around 2. We move towards the 90s now, and we have the Toronto Blue Jays, who last won a World Series in 1993. This, of course, was the famous Joe Carter walk-off home run to win the World Series over the Philadelphia Phillies. This team had a little more offensive power. John Olerud at first base, who finished with an OPS above 1,000, almost 1,100 that year, 24 homers, 54 doubles, 107 RBIs. He hit 363 that season with a 473 on base. Unbelievably underrated player. Roberto Alomar was a stud at second base, especially offensively. You had Joe Carter, who hit 30-plus home runs that year and an OPS above 800. Paul Molitor had over 50 extra base hits that year and OPS over 900. So their offense was pretty strong because they needed it. Pitching-wise, they weren't that great. Juan Guzman, Pat Henkin, those were their two best pitchers in their starting rotation, and they had ERAs approaching 4. In the bullpen, they were a little stronger, with Dwayne Ward, their closer, having 45 saves that year and an ERA at 2.13. 3-1-3, but overall, this team was led because of their hitting. After losing the World Series in '88 to the Dodgers, the A's returned in 1989 and won the World Series with a 4-game sweep over the Giants. The A's finished with a 99-63 record that season, first place in the American League West, and this team definitely had some players as well. You had Mark McGwire playing first base as a 25-year-old, hitting 30-plus homers. Ricky Henderson out in left field, of course, one of the greatest players of all time. They also had Jose Canseco, who came up that year in 65 games, hit 17 homers. Dave Parker was their DH, who had a great year at age 38. And as for the pitching side, they had a great rotation. Dave Stewart, Mike Moore, Bob Welch, and Kurt Young all had ERAs in the 3s. Mike Moore with a 2.61 that year. And in the bullpen, of course, they had Dennis Eckersley, one of the better closers of all time, a 1.56 ERA and a whip at .607 that year. This team was really built around their pitching, got enough offense to get the job done and win the World Series pretty easily. The Philadelphia Phillies have been featured in this video for losing quite a bit, but they've actually won a World Series fairly recently, and that was 2008. That Phillies team finished with a 92-70 record, first place in the National League East, and they won the World Series 4-1 over the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, this Phillies lineup was absolutely loaded. Ryan Howard at first base, hitting 48 home runs that year and driving in 146 RBIs. Chase Utley at second base with 33 homers, 41 doubles, and 100-plus RBIs. 915 OPS. You had Jimmy Rollins at shortstop, Pat Burrell hitting 30-plus homers in left field, Victorino in center, Jason Worth in right. And then pitching-wise, it was an interesting rotation. You had Cole Hamels, who was obviously the ace of that staff. You then had 45-year-old Jamie Moyer, who made 33 starts that year and had a 3.7 ERA. And as for the bullpen, you had Brad Lidge, who had 41 saves that year with a 1.95 ERA. I remember watching this Phillies team as a Mets fan. I didn't like them. As for the San Diego Padres, unfortunately, they have never won a World Series. The 2015 Royals. Because in 2015, the Kansas City Royals beat the Mets in the World Series 4-1. The Royals had a great season. They finished with a 95-67 record that year, first in the American League Central, this coming off 2014 where they lost to the Giants in the World Series. Royals had a very solid team, did a lot of the small things right. At catcher, they had Salvador Perez, who had a great season, Eric Hosmer at first base, Moustakas at third, Gordon in left, Lorenzo Cain in center, Kendrys Morales at DH, along with Ben Zobrist, who would play in different spots, come off the bench. Their starting rotation, not great. Edinson Volquez was their ace, followed by Yordano Ventura, and they also had Johnny Cueto, Danny Duffy. But the star of this team was the bullpen, because if they got a lead late in the game, they weren't giving it up. You had Greg Holland out of the back end of the pen, who had 32 saves that year. Kelvin Herrera had a 2.71 ERA. Wade Davis was lights out, took over the closer role at the end of the year. .94 ERA on the season, .78 whip. Anybody they threw in that bullpen ended up being lights out, it felt like. The Arizona Diamondbacks haven't been a team for that long, but they got a World Series fairly quickly, winning in 2001, which is the last time they won it. This Diamondbacks team was pretty dominant throughout the year, 92-70 record, finishing first place in the National League West, and they won that World Series in Game 7 over the New York Yankees, which we all know as the World Series where Luis Gonzalez got that flare hit up the middle against Mariano Rivera to win the World Series and give a walk-off win. Offensively, Luis Gonzalez was clearly the best. He hit 57 home runs that year with 36 doubles, 142 RBIs, and OPS over 1100. They also got a lot of production out of Reggie Sanders, Matt Williams, Steve Finley, and Mark Grace. Where they really shined, though, was their pitching. Possibly one of the nastiest 1-2 punches of the 2000s, they had Kurt Schilling and Randy Johnson, both having ERAs under 3. In the bullpen, they had one guy that I specifically remember, that's Byung-Young Kim. This Diamondbacks team, though, very memorable for me. The last time the Chicago White Sox won a World Series was in 2005, which broke a drought of 88 years because the last one they won before that was 1917. The White Sox finished that season 99-63, coming in first place in the American League Central, and they swept the Astros in 4 games in the World Series. This was a really solid team, obviously. I mean, they won the World Series. AJ Pierzynski at catcher, Paul Konerko at first base, hitting 40 home runs and finished with an OPS over 900. You had Tadahito Oguchi at second base, Juan Uribe at short, Joe Creedy at third. Jermaine Dye hit 30 home runs that year. On the pitching side, they were really strong. Mark Burley was the ace of that staff, along with Freddie Garcia, John Garland, and Jose Contreras, who all finished with ERAs below 4. Out of the bullpen, Dustin Hermanson was their main closer, who had 34 saves that year and an ERA at 2.04 with a whip at 1.1. The craziest part about this team, though, is breaking that 88-year drought. Now, time for my New York Mets. The last time they won a World Series was 1986. As a 23-year-old myself, I've never seen them win one. The 1986 Mets were dominant. 108-54 record, which got them first place in the National League East, and they won the World Series in 7 games over the Red Sox. Of course, this is when Mookie Wilson hit the ground ball through Bill Buckner's legs in Game 6, and the rest is history. That 1986 Mets team had a lot of solid players. Gary Carter behind the plate, Keith Hernandez at first base, who had a fantastic year. You had Darryl Strawberry, a 24-year-old out in right field, who was putting up great numbers. Wally Backman hit 20 that year. They had a deep bench with Mookie Wilson, Kevin Mitchell, Tim Tuffle, Howard Johnson, but they were led by their pitching that year. Dwight Gooden was their ace with a 2.84 ERA. You also had Ron Darling, Bob Ojeda, all with ERAs under 3, and then out of the pen they were equally as dominant, with no main relievers with an ERA over 4. That included Roger McDowell, Jesse Orosco. The last time the Atlanta Braves won a World Series was in 1995, where they finished with a 90-54 record to win the National League East. They won the World Series in 6 games over the Cleveland Indians 4-2, and just another absolute dominant team. Javi Lopez at catcher, Fred McGriff at first, Chipper Jones at third, David Justice out in right field, Ryan Klesko had a fantastic season in OPS above 1,000. On the pitching side, of course, we know how good the Braves pitchers have been in the past. Greg Maddux, a 1.63 ERA and a whip at .81. Yeah, he won the Cy Young for a 4th straight season that year. And then you can also add Tom Glavine and John Smoltz to that rotation. Out of the pen, Mark Wohlers was their main closer with a 2.09 ERA. The Braves were nasty and definitely led by their pitching, but their offense was pretty good too. Sorry, Mariners fans, but you've never won a World Series, so you don't have much in this video. For another historic drought, we go to the Chicago Cubs, who last won in 2016, which ended a 108-year World Series drought. 103-58 record, finished first place in the National League Central. The World Series was tough. They had to win it in 7 games over the Indians. When you look back at this roster, you say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense as to why they won. Anthony Rizzo at first base with an OPS above 900. Ben Zobrist at second. Chris Bryant hit 39 home runs that year, won the MVP, had a fantastic year. You had a variety of different catchers with Wilson Contreras, David Ross, Miguel Montero. Javi Baez was playing on this team. And on the pitching side, you had John Lester, who had one of the best seasons of his career with a 2.44 ERA that year. Jake Arrieta had a fantastic season, 3.10 ERA. Kyle Hendricks went off, a 2.13 ERA and a whip at .97. John Lackey, Jason Hamill, nobody on that staff had an ERA above 3.83. Out of the pen, you had Hector Rondon, Aroldis Chapman, who they got at the trade deadline, who was huge for them. It's obvious as to why they won the World Series in 2016. The San Francisco Giants had quite the impressive run a few years ago, winning 3 World Series in 5 years. But the last time they won one was in 2014, which was the end of that great dynasty. They finished with an 88-74 record that year, coming in through the wild card, second place in the National League West, and they won the World Series in 7 games over the Royals, one of the more enjoyable World Series I remember watching of recent times. This Giants team was led offensively by Buster Posey, their catcher, who had a great year, hitting 22 homers and 28 doubles with an OPS at .854. You also had Brandon Crawford, Pablo Sandoval, Michael Morse, and Hunter Pence helping out on the offensive side. And then on the pitching side, you had Madison Bumgarner, who of course was an ace, one of the best postseason pitchers of all time. He went off in the playoffs as always. Tim Hudson, Tim Lincecum, Matt Cain, Jake Peavy all helped. Out of the pen, you had Sergio Romo as their closer. Gene Machi was out there pitching great, an ERA below 3, a whip under 1. Jeremy Affeldt was a huge part of their success with an ERA at 2.28 on the season. This Giants team could win games. Now to talk about the most recent World Series champion, that would be the Boston Red Sox, who of course their last one they won was 2018. Dominant season last year, 108-54 record, won the AL East obviously. Dominated the playoffs, they won in 5 games over the Dodgers, 4-1. They were led by Mookie Betts, who won the MVP last season, and an OPS almost at 1100. You had JD Martinez, who hit 40 plus homers, 30 plus doubles, drove in 130, OPS almost at 1.05. Andrew Benintendi was huge for their team. Xander Bogaerts, another fantastic season. Chris Sale was dominant for their rotation, a 2.11 ERA, a whip under 1. David Price had a solid season with a 3.58 ERA. They made a huge acquisition of Nathan Eovaldi at the deadline, who was huge to their success, not only in the playoffs, but the regular season. Craig Kimbrell out of the pen, some would say had a down year, but still disgusting numbers. Joe Kelly was huge in the postseason. The Red Sox pretty much dominated the entirety of the 2018 season. The Tampa Bay Rays have never won a World Series. The Washington Nationals have never won a World Series. For the Los Angeles Angels, the last time they won a World Series was in 2002, back when they were called the Anaheim Angels. They finished 99-63 that year, second place in the American League West, and they won the World Series in 7 games over another California team, the San Francisco Giants, led by Barry Bonds. They had a mix of great players along with cult heroes. That cult hero I'm talking about, David Eckstein. They also had Troy Gloss, who had a huge year, Garrett Anderson, Darren Erstad, Tim Salmon. And on the pitching side, maybe not as dominant starting pitching wise, Ramon Ortiz, Jared Washburn, Kevin Appier, John Lackey at age 23, but their bullpen was pretty dominant, led by Troy Percival, who had a 1.92 ERA that year with 40 saves, along with Brendan Donnelly and Ben Weber, who had ERAs below 3, and Scott Shields as well. It's hard to think of the Marlins winning a World Series with the current team they have, but they've actually won a couple, and their most recent one was in 2003 when they were still called the Florida Marlins. The Marlins finished in second place that year in the National League East with a 91-71 record, and beat the Yankees in 6 games in the World Series. As for this team, a lot of talent, a lot of great names, a lot of great players. Pudge Rodriguez behind the plate catching, Derek Lee at first base, what a beast, underrated player he was. Luis Castillo at second base, Alex Gonzalez with a monster year at short, Mike Lowell at third, Juan Pierre out in center field stealing 65 bags that year, along with a 20-year-old by the name of Miguel Cabrera. On the pitching side, they had a lot of great pitchers, Carl Pavano, Brad Penny, but personally my 2 favorite from this rotation, Dontrelle Willis and Josh Beckett. As for the bullpen side, Braden Looper was their main closer, but Ugueth Urbina was really the best guy out of their pen that year with a 1.41 ERA, and they had Dontrelle Willis. Who doesn't love to watch that guy pitch? As for the Cleveland Indians, they currently hold the longest drought in Major League Baseball because the last time they won a World Series was 1948. The Indians in that season finished with a 97-58 record led by manager Lou Boudreau, and they finished in first place in the American League. They didn't even have divisions then. Hold on, Lou Boudreau? Lou Boudreau also played 152 games at shortstop that year for the Indians, so he was a player manager who, by the way, had a great year at the plate. Ken Keltner hit 31 homers that year, OPS above 900. Larry Doby out in the outfield having a great season with an OPS approaching 900. On the pitching side, they had Bob Lemon, Bob Feller, and they had a pretty dominant bullpen as well, with Russ Christopher, Steve Gromick, Ed Kleiman, and Satchel Paige, all with ERAs below 3. For the Detroit Tigers, we go back to the 80s, specifically 1984, which was the last time they won the World Series. They finished 104-58, which got them a first place finish in the American League East. You had their catcher Lance Parrish hitting 33 home runs that year, but only having an OPS at 730. Lou Whitaker over at second base, Alan Trammell, Hall of Famer at shortstop, Howard Johnson at third base, Kirk Gibson out in right field, and on the pitching side, they were led by Jack Morris, Dan Petrie, and Juan Berenguer, and out of the bullpen, they had Willie Hernandez, who was their main closer, 32 saves on the year, 1.92 ERA, a whip under 1. For the Pittsburgh Pirates, it's coming up on 40 years since they've last won a World Series, because the last one they won was in 1979, where they finished first place in the National League East with a 98-64 record. This, of course, was the Pirates team that had some of my favorite jerseys of all time. Willie Stargell playing first base, Dave Parker out in right field, Bill Robinson in left field. You also had John Milner, Phil Garner. On the pitching side, they were led by their ace Burt Blyleven, along with John Candelaria, Bruce Kisson, Don Robinson, and Jim Rooker. Out of the pen, they were pretty filthy. Ken Tekulve was their main closer, who had a 2.75 ERA that year with a 1.17 whip, and even Doc Ellis got a little bit of playing time, pitched in 3 games, 1 start. Gotta mention Doc Ellis, of course. As for the Milwaukee Brewers, they've never won a World Series. 2017 World Series champion Houston Astros were a dominant team. 101-61 record in the American League West, which got them first place, and after dominating the Red Sox in the ALDS, the ALCS and World Series both went to Game 7, with them eventually winning over the Dodgers. Brian McCann behind the plate, Yuli Gurriel at first, Altuve at second in his MVP season, Carlos Correa at short, Bregman at third, George Springer in center, Carlos Beltran DH, you had Marwin Gonzalez, Evan Gattis, absolutely disgusting lineup at the plate. On the pitching side, pretty dominant, big thanks to Justin Verlander, who they acquired at the deadline, who had a 1.06 ERA in his 5 starts in the regular season with the Astros, a whip at .647. They also had Dallas Keuchel, had a 2.9 ERA that year, Charlie Morton was looking good, Brad Peacock, Colin McHugh. Out of the pen, Ken Giles was pretty dominant as their closer, 2.3 ERA, a whip at 1. Chris Davinsky was nasty with a 2.68 ERA and a whip under 1. Will Harris with an ERA under 3, whip under 1. There weren't very many weak points of this Astros team. The Minnesota Twins last won a World Series in 1991, finishing with a 95-67 record, first place in the American League West. This team was led offensively by names like Chili Davis, Kirby Puckett, Shane Mack, Ken Herbeck. Considering it was the 90s, they still had 4 players with an OPS over 800, and then pitching-wise, they were led by Jack Morris at age 36, who had a great year, 3.43 ERA. They had Kevin Tapani, Scott Erickson, those were the 3 main guys in the rotation. Out of the pen, Rich Aguilera was dominant, 2.35 ERA, whip hovering right around 1.1, 42 saves on the year. The Texas Rangers never won a World Series, but boy did they get close. The Colorado Rockies never won a World Series. And for our final team, we have the Cincinnati Reds, who last won a World Series in 1990. The 1990 Reds finished that season with a 91-71 record, finishing first in the National League West, led by Lou Piniella, and swept the A's in the World Series 4-0. The Cincinnati Reds team was good, maybe not as good as some of the big red machine teams in the past, but good enough to win the World Series, led by guys like Mariano Duncan, Barry Larkin, Hall of Famer, Chris Sabo, Eric Davis, who had a great year at the plate, Paul O'Neill. And then on the pitching side, they were led by Tom Browning, who was their ace, followed by Jose Rijo, Jack Armstrong, and Danny Jackson. And out of the pen, they had Randy Myers, who was their main closer, 2.08 ERA, 31 saves, whip at 1.119, along with Rob Dibble, who had an ERA at 1.74 that year and a whip under 1. So that's the last time every team in Major League Baseball won their last World Series. Pretty good amount of research, pretty good amount of time put into this video. So if you guys do enjoy it and you want to see more of this kind of content on the channel, leave a like. That would really be appreciated by me and show me that you want to see more of it. Subscribe to the channel if you like baseball content. This is the place you need to be. Click that sub button, join the team, as well as dropping me a follow on Twitter and Instagram at GiraffeNeckMarc, links in the description. You guys know the drill from here on out. YouTube recommends you watch this video on the left, as well as the video on the right is my most recent upload. So click through those if you have not yet seen them. Thank you all for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.